My name is Antanas Verikas. I am professor of artificial intelligence, machine learning, and my duty today is just to make sure that this event runs according to the plan, not more than that. So what is NORDIC TALKS? So NORDIC TALKS is a platform for exchange ideas for different experts in different fields to discuss lessons learned and to discuss new ideas and experiences. So this talk is on artificial intelligence, and we have today two distinguished guests. We have Helen Nilsson. Helen is director of Nordic Council of Ministers in Lithuanian office. So very welcome, Helen. Välkommen till Kauno. And also we have the main speaker today is Thomas Bolander. Thomas is from Technical University of Denmark. The department is Applied Mathematics and Computer Science. And Thomas will give the main talk. But before that, Helen will tell us a welcome word to this event. I could keep this.
Oh, that is brilliant.
It's up to you if you want me, so I can keep it.
I like that. So I need, as you see, a third hand today. But just to kill the curiosity, this is a typical Scandinavian accident, so skiing. But it's only 1.5 weeks left, and then I will run and jump again, inshallah. So, even better. So you have already now learned what NORDIC TALKS is about, the platform of ideas and discussions focusing on the Nordic countries and more specifically the Nordic-Baltic cooperation. And I will just mention that we started to organize these NORDIC TALKS last year, focusing a lot on the issue of or subject of trust, also together with expertise from Denmark and others. And more specifically, social trust. Today, as you know, we will talk about artificial intelligence. And I think in the end of the day, we also have to include trust in that subject. And we at the Nordic Council of Ministers are also very glad to be able to organize a Nordic talk in the framework of the Scandinavian Days that is now up and running here in Kauno. Very nice. I came just from another event we have on sustainable tourism with Iceland on Skype to explain to us how they have been able to increase the tourism so much in a sustainable way. But having said that, the Nordic Council of Ministers, if you don't know, is a forum of cooperation between the governments of the Nordic countries, and that is Denmark, Finland, Iceland, Norway, and Sweden, but also the autonomous areas of the Faroe Islands, Greenland, and Åland Islands. And the Nordic Council of Ministers office here in Lithuania, who was established in 1991, just for you to know, serve as a local observer for the council, and the headquarters is in Copenhagen, identifying trends and opportunities for joint Nordic-Lithuanian cooperation. And the office has several Nordic exchange and grant programs in Lithuania, also including students and the sector of education, but also in the field of media, NGO cooperation, sustainability as such, youth, gender, and mobility programs or cooperation between institutions and organizations. And together with partners, we identify, develop, and implement projects in different areas. Our focus this year, as well as next year, for you to remember, is towards Agenda 2030, the SDGs, digitalization, children and youth, as well as sport and health, And the Nordic Talk is a concept in which we can reach out and be able to cooperate and discuss with relevant institutions, organizations, as well as the audience. So before we start this interesting Nordic Talk on AI, I would like to thank our partners for this event, of course the Kauno Technical University, but as well as the panelists and the moderator. And with that, I wish us all a meaningful and interesting discussion. Thank you.
Just a few words before Thomas starts. So now talk will be given by Thomas, and then it's about 30 minutes. And after that will be a panel discussion. It's planned for about 40 minutes, and here we have panelists sitting here, and I will introduce them later. And after that will be questions and answers. So now Thomas is very well known in this field, in social intelligence, I think. And he gave a lot of talks. I looked on Google, so now you can ask Google. I know quite a lot about different people. So I asked Google about Thomas, and he gave 99 invited popular science talks. And he gave a lot of talks in conferences, and he was chair and co-chair in more than 50 conferences, and he stayed as a guest researcher in different countries, different universities, France, China, Scotland, Italy, and so on. So, very welcome, Thomas, to Kauno, to Lithuania.
Thanks. So we'll just settle the technical stuff here first. Yeah. All right. So tough problems in AI, 30 minutes. It's a bit of a task because there's so much to say about this. So that was a very nice introduction of me. Thank you so much. So I don't want to say so much more, except, so I'm an associate professor in logic and AI at the Technical University of Denmark. And as was also said, I'm particularly interested in social aspects of AI. I'm going to talk a little bit about that towards the end of the talk. But let's dig into it. So I wanted to say just a few words about what AI is in the first place. And it's not so easy to define. There are many possible ways. So John McCarthy, the father of AI, tried to define it more than 60 years ago. And then he said it's the science and engineering of making intelligent machines, in particular intelligent computer programs. So the idea is that artificial intelligence is about making machines intelligent. But that doesn't really solve anything because we don't even really know what intelligence is. So how can we even start to understand what it means for a machine to be intelligent? Another way to think about it is that what it is about is to make machines do things that so far only humans have been able to. So that could be something like making a machine that plays chess, making a machine that can drive a car, making a machine that can engage in a dialogue, or making a machine that can do medical diagnosis. And that's kind of a nice way of defining it. And when we then try to make machines that can do these things that only humans have been able to, then we're also heavily inspired by the way humans solve these problems and by the way the human brain works. So some of what I'm going to talk about is a bit about the connection between human intelligence and artificial intelligence. But one thing that is super important to understand from the very beginning is that human intelligence and machine intelligence are not directly comparable. It might be that we are very inspired by human intelligence when we build these machines, but it doesn't imply that machines think in a human-like way. So it's actually more or less the opposite. There's a kind of dualism. And to explain that, so then think about human intelligence. So the way we think about it is something rather flexible and general. We can learn a lot of different things. When we are born, we can do nothing. But then we learn to walk, maybe we learn to play chess, maybe we learn to drive a car, and we learn to engage in dialogues, etc. So we have this kind of very open, flexible type of intelligence. if we look at AI today, and of course it can change, but if you look at AI today, it's really about systems that are much more narrow and that have been designed to solve particular well-defined problems. And actually, as a really good rule of thumb, you can say that the more well-defined and clearly delimited a problem or task is, the easier it is to make AI that can solve that task. So to give some examples, think of something like chess. So chess is super well-defined and clearly delimited. There are only very few rules in chess you have to obey, and there's a very clear, formally specified condition for winning the game. Okay, so this doesn't imply from a human perspective that it's an easy game to play, because the combinatorial complexity of the game is insane, right? There are so many possible moves and move sequences. But thinking about a lot of possible moves, this is not the problem that computers today have. They have insane amounts of computational power. So this is not their limitation, right? But the limitation is that the problem they're solving has to be sufficiently well-defined and clearly delimited. And then chess is perfect, few rules, few conditions. Okay, so no problem. And this is also why already in 1997, IBM succeeded in making a computer program, Deep Blue, that became world chess champion. So then we can take a step up in complexity from the perspective of machines and think about something like driverless cars. Okay, is that well-defined and clearly delimited? Well, there are still rules you have to obey in traffic, right? But they're not like chess rules. There are many more of these rules, and they're less formally specifiable. So it is more complicated from a machine perspective. And this is also why we're not yet all driving driverless cars. And then we can take a huge jump up again and think about something like chatbots. So what does it take to build a robot that you can chat with for a few minutes in a coffee break? Well, that is really very, very difficult from an AI and machine perspective. Why? Well, because it's everything but well-defined and clearly delimited, right? It's the opposite of chess, right? What are the rules in a dialogue? What can you say? How do you keep track of a dialogue? What is reasonable? What is not reasonable, right? So the rules are very hard to specify. And this is also why, of course, there's a lot of, I'm also going to talk about AI for language use, so something that goes in the direction of chatbots, but this is really much harder than the two other examples. And this is very important to understand, because it means that if you look at the picture on the slide, then the complexity from the machine perspective goes from left to right. Chess, simple, chatbots, complicated, right? But if we look at the difficulty for most humans, then it's the other way around from right to left, right? So for most of us, it's easier to engage in a dialogue over a cup of coffee and chat a bit than it is to drive a car safely through the city center of Rome in rush hour, which again is simpler than becoming the world chess champion, right? But of course, in many cases, we kind of, when we think about AI, we think about it as something like, okay, now the machines are becoming human-like and they are somehow solving human problems. And unless you think deeply about it, you might think that they're solving it in a human-like way, right? But they're not. And they have different strengths and weaknesses. Of course, they're better than us in many things, like now chess and now also Go and other games. They're better than us in these well-defined, clearly delimited problems, but they don't yet have the kind of flexibility we have, and the less well-defined a problem is, the harder it gets. So if you are sort of worried about your job or some tasks in your job, or maybe you're really happy about the possibility of having a robot or computer that can solve some of the tasks you have to solve, then the first thing you should think about is how well-defined and clearly delimited is that problem. The more it is that, the easier it would be to automatize it by machines. Okay, then of course, so AI is not one thing, right? Because if it's not really about one type of general flexible intelligence that we can just teach anything we want, then it's really about building, whenever we want to build a system, we have to design some AI for it. For instance, if I want to do something like Siri on iPhone, so an intelligent personal assistant, then I have to use some types of techniques. If I want to make a system that can recognize faces, I use a different set of techniques. So it's interesting to kind of understand what are these different techniques and how does everything fit together. And that is very hard to do in only a few minutes. But a kind of a rough way of trying to get an overview is to separate AI into two paradigms, so the symbolic paradigm and the sub-symbolic paradigm. And I'm going to try to explain what these are about. So, in a way, in the symbolic paradigm, you have a top-down approach to simulating aspects of human cognition. So what does it mean? It means that you take the highest level of human reasoning. So that is our linguistic, conscious, logical reasoning when we make plans, when we use words, and logical reasoning in order to solve problems, decide where we have to go tomorrow, or how we get home from a talk or whatever. And this is where we have things like Siri on iPhone and chess computers. And in this paradigm, we can build systems that are robust, predictable, and explainable. And when we talk about trust, so that was mentioned in the introduction, then it's easier to build systems that can easily be trusted in the symbolic paradigm. However, there's a limitation here. So these systems are really built to solve specific problems. So if I build a chess computer in this paradigm, it cannot actually not even play tic-tac-toe, and it's not so easy to make it adapt to another game. And so it's missing some core component of what we think of as intelligence, namely the ability to learn, the kind of flexibility that you can learn from, you can take also learning from one area and take it to another area. And if you want something like that, you have to go to the sub-symbolic paradigm. And the sub-symbolic paradigm has the complete opposite approach to simulating aspects of human condition. So it's really a bottom-up where you say, okay, instead of starting at the highest level of human conscious reasoning, let's start at the lowest level, which is like we have neurons and we have neuron connections and neurons that fires and activates other neurons. So you really dig into the atomic level of the human brain and you try to build a model of that, put it into a computer and see what comes out of it. And there we have techniques as artificial neural networks and sub-techniques like deep learning, and those are really crucial buzzwords in AI these days because the sub-symbolic paradigm has been really thriving over the last years, and a lot of what is happening today is coming from this paradigm. And in this paradigm, you can do, for instance, image recognition. So I could, for instance, build an artificial neural network for being able to distinguish cats and dogs. So I could show it a lot of pictures of cats and say these are cats, and show it a lot of pictures of dogs and say these are dogs. And then eventually it will pick up the patterns that distinguish these two animals, and it will learn. And then if it sees a new cat or a new dog, it will know which one it is. So, but there's an interesting thing, because when we get this paradigm is mostly, if you want to think about what kind of cognition it is we're talking about, then it's mainly like a perception, right? So it's like pattern recognition. You perceive sort of input that you get. You see something and then you realize what it is. You give it a category, for instance. And it's super nice in this paradigm that you have the flexibility, that you have the ability to learn. But a consequence is that your systems are never 100% predictable or error-free. So when you build systems this way, they learn from experience just as humans do, but also just as humans can make mistakes, these systems can make mistakes. And so potentially this is a threat to the trust that was mentioned in the beginning. On the other hand, we really need this, right? If we want to build a driverless car, it has to be able to recognize objects in its surroundings, other road users, traffic lights, road signs, everything. I mean, and this can only be done in the sub-symbolic paradigm. So there's a kind of tension between the limited but sort of predictable, robust, understandable paradigm in AI, and then the one that learns and is flexible, but is less predictable. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about, I'm going to talk mostly now about the sub-symbolic paradigm, but then I'm going to move slowly into combinations with the symbolic paradigm. So, okay. So I said that these, in the sub-symbolic paradigm, it's mainly something that we can compare to perception, so that we can recognize patterns. But when you can recognize patterns, you can also start to synthesize patterns, so generate patterns. And that is kind of interesting because it means that you can learn from patterns, and you can try to start to generate similar patterns, and people have tried that on a lot of different things. One of the interesting things is to try to compose music. So there has been a big research project called Flow Machines, where they trained a system to produce chorales in the style of Bach. So what they did was to feed the neural network with all the chorales that Bach has ever written, and then it asks it to produce something similar, right? So what happens here is that the system picks up on the patterns in his music, so that it kind of learns the pattern of a Bach chorale, and then it can produce something that is similar to a Bach chorale. And just, I wanted to illustrate it to you, so I'm now going to play two sound bits. And one is a real Bach chorale, written by Bach himself. And the other one is the AI trying to write a chorale in the style of Bach. And I want you to hear both pieces and see if you can guess which one is which. So now you get music piece number 1. So another advantage here is that you get a small musical intermezzo where you can relax and enjoy the nice music. So music piece number 2. Okay, so who thinks number 1 is Bach? Let me see. Well, at least 5? Yeah, who thinks number 2 is Bach? Oh, overwhelming. Ah, nice. Okay, yeah, of course, and as you know, the majority is always right? And you're the best audience I've ever got in that respect. So maybe classical music plays a bigger role in Lithuania than in other countries. So, but I mean, okay, but there was still a small minority that didn't guess correctly, and that's already kind of interesting, right? That it's no longer completely obvious, right? When we are communicating or we're seeing the output of an AI, and until recently it has been completely obvious, right? That what you got out of AI systems was kind of very far from something a human could have invented. And of course, you can say a lot of what is going on here. So there's some interesting points is that, okay, this is about pattern recognition and reproducing patterns in a way, right? So it's a system that somehow, let's say you have the first phrase of a Bach piece, and then the system tries to predict what would be the next node in that piece, right? Because it learns the pattern, so it can predict how a pattern is continued. And in a sense, it's just a big, very super complicated statistical machine that says, okay, what is the most likely next node here? But then, of course, you can add that node and you can repeat, and then you can produce an entire song in that way. And then if you want to be skeptical, you say, yeah, okay, fine, but this is not really, if you think about it, so it's only a machine that takes what Bach has written and then it produces something Bach-like, right? It's not that you feed it with everything Bach has ever written and then it invents Schoenberg or Beatles or Cardi B or something completely different, right? So maybe the creativity is limited. But okay, let's move on, because so this is about music, and of course you can if you can recognize patterns and produce patterns in music, you can also do it in other areas, and language is another area. So what I'm going to show you now in a couple of slides is the same type of technique, but used on language. So what does it mean to use it on language? Well, you can feed then an algorithm like this with a lot of text, and then it tries to recognize patterns in text. And then it can predict the next word in a text, for instance. And what I'm showing you now is the OpenAI language model. It's only a couple of months old, but this is only the publicly available version because they kept the one that is that they have themselves is even better and more precise, but it's not publicly available. They trained it on 20 million pages of text, so that's approximately 100,000 books. So in order to learn what are likely next words in a sentence, you simply put in 100,000 of books, right? And then you have a very big statistical model. So for instance, if you can, it's a bit small, but maybe you can see it. So the first example, I said, I'd like a nice hot cup of, and then it says that most probable the next word is coffee, and the second most probable is tea. Well, that was correct. So, but then if I add the word skimmed, so if I say I'd like a nice hot cup of skimmed, then all of a sudden the most probable next word is milk instead of coffee, right? So something is happening here. But it's interesting that this, of course, the system doesn't know what coffee is and milk is or anything else. It doesn't have a connection between words and the real world. But being trained only on words is enough to have a decent way of predicting possible words and sentences. And of course, again, you can keep on using this and produce the next word and the next word and the next word, and all of a sudden you can produce an entire book if you wanted. So I just for the fun of it, I wanted to see if it could predict what would happen when I came to Lithuania to give this talk. So I took the system and I fed it with this beginning text. A Danish AI researcher was invited to give a talk at the Scandinavian Days in Kauno, Lithuania. The subject of his talk was tough problems in AI. Okay? And then I asked the system to say, okay, so how does this continue? So then I could prepare for what was going to happen. Then it says, he was surprised to see the huge number of people in the audience, which is true. He expected to see only 10. Well, I hope for more, but anyway. He was surprised to see that there were few people in the audience who spoke English. It's true that I didn't know what the people were talking about, he said, but I wanted to give them a voice. Okay, so, well, let's see if that is what is going to happen when you have the questions and answers afterwards. I hope not. Then it continues. The talk was a good example of a good presentation, said Dala. It gave a solid background to what went on in the talk, and it was easy to understand how the talk was going to affect the society for years to come. Okay, so, and he even picks up on a Lithuanian name, right? Because the context has something to do with Lithuania, right? So that's kind of impressive. Then it continues. In the talk, a group of professors from University of Copenhagen and a number of students from the University of Copenhagen presented a hypothesis about how to change the way people think that involves understanding the social world. The new theory, they suggested, will help us to know the social structure of the mind and will bring about a new understanding of how people think. Okay, so now, well, okay, I'm not a group of professors from University of Copenhagen, not even from University of Copenhagen. But I'm going to talk about social intelligence, right? So in a sense, it's a bit impressive and a bit freaky, but again, I mean, so this is perfect English. So already that is a big feat, right? And now you have systems that can use perfect English. They can continue stories, so we don't even have to invent stories anymore. But does it mean that they know what they're talking about? Well, not in the sense that, as we understand it, right? Because there's no connection between the words and the meaning. But you can still be inspired by it and say, oh, but now we can create art this way. And of course, people tried. So I'm now going to give you an example. A clip from a sci-fi movie that was written using this technique. So they simply fed the algorithm, the computer program, with all science fiction movie manuscripts that have ever been written, and then they asked the computer to produce something similar. So let's see.
In a future with mass unemployment, young people are forced to sell blood. It's something I can do.
You should see the boy and shut up. I was the one who was going to be 100 years old.
Well, I saw him again. The way you were sent to me, that was a big, honest idea. I am not a bright light.
Well, I have to go to the skull. I don't know.
What do you mean?
Well, I don't know anything about any of this, so...
Then what?
There's no answer.
We're going to see the money.
All right, you can't tell me that.
Okay, and then and if you feel that you didn't understand quite what the movie was about, and that's probably because I took a clip in the middle of the movie, that's actually not the truth. This is the beginning of the movie. And of course, it's hilarious, and it did very well in a competition, in an AI movie competition. But there are also some fundamental differences here, right? So probably, I mean, what is missing is the idea that when you write a manuscript, you probably have an idea, you have a plot, you have a morale, you have something you want to tell, and then you build it up from like a top idea, and then you refine your idea. So there's something like that is not happening in these systems, right? They just produce a manuscript word by word. But of course, still you can be inspired by this and think this is really amazing, and let's see how far we can push these ideas. And some of the people who tried that was Facebook, and they thought, okay, let's try to use these ideas to build robots that can negotiate about objects. So you gave the robots some objects like books and hats and basketballs, and then you said, okay, now try to negotiate about exchanging these objects so you somehow get a good deal. It could be, for instance, that for me, books are very important, but basketballs are not. So in principle, I would be willing to give away a lot of basketballs just to get one book, right? Okay, so they use the same technique in order to try to train them to engage in these negotiation dialogues, but just taking human dialogues and try to make them mimic the patterns. And they did, but they get lousy deals out of it, right? Because there was no idea about getting a good deal. They were just mimicking the language. So the negotiations looked real, but they get lousy deals. So it could be that one robot says, okay, give me everything you got and I will give you nothing in the return. And the other robot would say, yeah, okay, fine with me, right? So no problem. Let's do that. So then they thought, okay, no, this is not good. We have to train the robots to get good deals. And then they used another technique. So it's kind of inspired by behaviorism for instance, in rodents, where you simply train a lot of times and you see what works. So they were training against each other a lot of times in order to get better and better deals. But what then happened was that they forgot everything about the original goal, which was to mimic like real human English negotiation language. Because now the goal was different. Now the goal was just to get a good deal. So why would you even stick to English, right? And then they started to talk gibberish, at least from a human perspective, and saying things like, balls have 0 to me, to me, to me, to me, too. And the other robot would say something similar, silly, and then they would exchange, and everybody would be like, whoa, what happened there? And then that was covered in the news quite heavily. So like in Forbes, it said, Facebook AI creates its own language in creepy preview of our potential future. And New York Post wrote, creepy Facebook bots talk to each other in a secret language. The Telegraph, Facebook shuts down robots after they invent their own language. And these are kind of interesting because in order to invent your own secret language, you need an intention to do so. You need to know what it means, right? You need to want to say something that cannot be understood by everybody. And this is really not what happened. And it's not true that they had to shut it down because somehow these robots were out of control and they became too intelligent. Actually, the problem was that the techniques they used were somehow kind of naive or not mature enough to get what they wanted. So that's the reason they stopped working on it, because it really didn't work out. So what is the problem here? Well, one of the problems is that if you think about negotiations, what is involved in that? There's a lot of things involved in it. So you have some planning, you think about, okay, so what could I say? Maybe I want to pretend that books are not very important to me because then I can get a better deal when I propose something. Maybe I don't want to say that you can have all my basketballs if I can just have you one book, even if I mean it sincerely. But in the beginning, I might only choose to offer one basketball for a book because then I could get a better deal, right? So there's a lot of stuff going on, and you try to also take the perspective of the person that you're negotiating with. You try to see, okay, what would be the effect if I say this? What is then going on in the head of the other person? Or what can I say to make the other person believe certain things? So that seems to be like higher, if we think about humans, it seems to be higher cognitive abilities. There's some planning involved, there's some complex reasoning, there's some perspective taking the perspective of the other agent. That was not included in this, because what they did was essentially to use techniques that is based on, well, something that looks most like perception and something else that looks most like behaviorism. And of course, there's more to it than that. And that kind of brings me to the next or the last thing I wanted to talk about. So now we actually, only now we're going into my area, which is social intelligence. But the point was that if you want to do something like negotiate, right? How can you negotiate if you're not able to take the perspective of the person you're negotiating with, right? You have to try to understand what is it that my partner wants to achieve. I want to somehow guess what the other one wants to have, so I can do a good negotiation. Now, the problem is that we know that social intelligence is a really, really hard thing to mimic in artificial intelligence, and a lot of important people in AI have said that it's among the three human cognitive abilities that are hardest to simulate in a computer and a robot. And just to illustrate some of the problems, I have an example here from the use of hospital robots in the United States. So they have this kind of talk robot in a lot of hospitals, and it's delivering medical equipment and blood samples and internal mail, etc. And then at one point, one of the secretaries is on the phone, and the talk robot arrives with a letter for her, and it goes into her office, and it says, "Talk has arrived." And she doesn't react because she's on the phone. But the robot, of course, then just repeats, "Talk has arrived." She's still on the phone, so she still doesn't react. So it just repeats, "Talk has arrived," and then eventually she says, "I'm on the phone. If you say talk has arrived one more time, I'm going to kick you in the camera." And there's another example where the chief surgeon says, "It doesn't have the manners we teach our children. I find it insulting that I stand out of the way for patients, but it just barrels right on." Okay, so how do you solve these problems? Well, I said that we have AI that can do pattern recognition, so it should be possible to recognize if someone is on the phone. Yes, true, no problem. But how do you react to it? Okay, then you can program a robot to say, okay, if you see someone speaking on the phone, go away and come back 5 minutes later. Yes, but is that really AI? At least it's not the level of AI we would wish, right? We would wish the robot itself to somehow understand that it should not interrupt other people from achieving their goals. Okay, but then you have to understand the goals of other people. And this is really one of the core things of social intelligence, is to understand the mental states of others. So you want to understand what is the goal that someone else has. You want to understand what other people believe, right? That's true. That's important when you negotiate. That is important in any kind of social situation. So my answer to this is, what I think is necessary is to have a general ability to put yourself into the shoes of others, a general ability to take the perspective of other humans. This is what is called theory of mind in cognitive psychology. So in my research, I'm trying to get these things into the system. But that is something I cannot do with some sub-symbolic AI. It's something I don't know how I would even start to do with neural networks. So then I go back and use stuff from the symbolic paradigm. And then it kind of becomes a combination of paradigms. And when later in the panel discussion, when we're going to talk about maybe trust and explainable AI and stuff like that, then I think that some of the answer, at least my view here, is that some of the answer lies in the combination of these two paradigms that have otherwise sort of lived independent lives in the history of AI, at least until recently. The idea is this. So of course, when I want to build a robot that it has some level of social intelligence, and can understand other people, then at first it needs to recognize the world around it. It needs to understand that this is a phone and this is a remote for the computer and this is a laptop computer, etc. So, and that is something that we do with neural networks. So we track objects, we track faces, we track skeletons. But then when it comes to really understanding what others want to achieve, to understand what they believe, what they have seen, what they haven't seen, that is something where we use symbolic AI, because then we get these higher cognitive abilities, the ability to do planning, the ability to reason about intentions, and logical reasoning, etc. So, and unfortunately, that's all I have time to say. So thanks for your attention.
Thank you very much, Thomas, for a very interesting talk. And now we start our discussion. So, Thomas, please take a seat. I think we are going to use those microphones. Yes.
You can put it to your pocket.
So we have 4 panelists. Thomas, you already know him. And please, Eva, come here. And you please introduce yourselves. Just tell 1 or 2 sentences what you're doing, and I know where you're from. I know that Eva is from your technology company, but please tell about yourself.
Okay, so hello everyone. I'm Yeva from Neurotechnology. I work currently as an algorithm developer, and our company basically focuses on computer vision problems and biometrics. But we also have a few departments for investigation of various other problems related to AI development. And so next year we are going to have our 30th birthday. And we are going to have also our department in Kauno. So if you are interested in this area, if you work for it, or if you plan to make your career in this area, so please come join us. Okay, thanks.
Thank you, and please take a seat. Vydas. Vydas is representing a company and a university also. So please tell a few words about yourself.
Oh, it's working. Maybe someone of you knows me, Vydas Raudonis. I am CEO of my own company called Power of I. My company also is working with computer vision problems, which comes from industry. Also, I'm working in Kauno University of Technology as associated professor.
Thank you. Please take a seat. And Jonas. Jonas is our bright student, master student.
Yeah, hello, I'm a student of Kauno University of Technology. At the moment, I'm also involved in several R&D projects related to AI, and yeah, I'm from the power systems, so we basically need very trustful, or how to say, very confident AI, so we are quite late into this field of AI, but we're also very interested in that.
Thank you. So now I prepared a few questions, and it doesn't mean that we have to follow just those questions. So you are free to raise any other questions, and we can discuss that. But we start with those, and I would like to start with this looking a little bit back. So if you look back, so the society had ups and downs with artificial intelligence. For those of you who are older, remember, for example, expert systems in the beginning of the 80s, it was very big hope. So with those systems, they made a contribution to the development of some processes and automation. Then we had very big hopes with artificial neural networks in the beginning of the 90s. And now, but now it seems it is believed now that it is different now. At different times, and we think that from now on, the artificial intelligence will play a much more important role in the society. And do you agree with that? Are those hopes and beliefs, are they substantiated? So could we discuss this? What do you think about that, about those hopes? We had a lot of hopes earlier, but why it could be different now?
Who do you want to ask?
Okay, please start, Thomas.
Right.
I think it would be good that we, all of us, participate in the discussion. And
no, yeah. So we had ups and downs, and I think my first point would be that we should maybe expect that to continue to happen, right? So that's one thing, right? That could be downs again, but every down was followed by going up. So there's no need to believe that AI is suddenly just completely dead, because there was actually one point in time where that was believed, that all of AI had kind of failed, right? But then the other thing is, like, if we take a general perspective on it and try to compare with industrialism, then this was about building machines that could somehow do repetitive physical tasks. So whatever we previously had done with our physical bodies could be taken over by machines, at least to some extent, but mainly sort of the repetitive routine tasks. What is happening with AI is that we are building machines that take over cognitive tasks. So now it's not about replacing our physical abilities, but our mental abilities. But what we're seeing is still that, as with the industrialism, it is mainly about repetitive and routine tasks, right? And of course, this can change, but this is what we are seeing, but again, this is also more than sufficient in a sense, because a lot of what we do in our everyday life is routine and repetitive, and so there's still a huge potential for that. So I think, just as if we look back before industrialism, we would say that industrialism made a huge change in our society. I think that is going to be true for AI as well. On the other hand, we should not maybe, sometimes we might have ideas about the future that are a bit too extreme, or we see AI and then we start believing that it will soon take over the world and be more intelligent than human beings. I don't see that. I don't see anything that gets even close to me being worried about that. But I see it as a big change of society. It's just how long this will take. It's not quite clear, right? Because we might slow down in periods as well. Now it's going fast, but yeah, we don't know.
Okay, so it's quite difficult to comment after Thomas, because he was so informative and he knows a bit more. I'm quite enthusiastic about the success of AI. However, yes, I do remind myself of those previous two AI winters that came before, and it showed that there were already two periods where people thought that we are almost here, we almost have the perfect robot who acts and feels and thinks and moves like a human, and probably someone of us may right now may think this way, and I believe that we still lack resources for it. However, I do appreciate that there are very many areas where AI can work just perfectly. These areas are quite narrow, but AI shows really good everything, how it works. Yeah, so that's...
There are still hopes that that finally we can create machines that frees our time for creativity, and those routine jobs, which I don't like, that pick and place, will be changed by machines. Hopefully it does soon.
Maybe one more point to add is that in terms of students or freshers who are interested in AI, it's also, you can see a very big change, that in the past maybe AI looked something very complicated, right? Thanks. Complicated, and now there are so many courses, online courses, so many languages in Python, Java, C, and so on, MATLAB, and examples where you can just pick up the examples, try your own, get the certain results. So people are involved faster and faster into it. Of course, you need mathematical and physical understanding of what you want to create, the models.
Not really. You can start from the,
But to start,
without knowing.
Yeah, but to start, you can just to get what it is.
Yeah. So the entrance barrier to AI has been falling down dramatically. So now, if I don't know, if I get a cat and I want to build a what is it called in English? The where it goes through? I don't know, cat door, whatever. I want to build a cat door, and then I want to have a system that can recognize my cat and distinguish it from all other cats, right? And okay, now I'm a researcher in AI, but even if I hadn't been, it would actually be fairly accessible. There are online tools. I can train on images of cats. I could do that myself. I mean, I could Google stuff, and I could buy the webcam. I could connect it to my computer. And this is something that, I mean, in principle, this was possible in the 80s, but it would just be unheard of that as an individual or small startup company without particular expertise that you could start building systems like this. But now it's really easy. So that is, of course, in itself a game changer. And we see it a lot of in vision as you're working in. And in particular, a lot is going on in health and medicine, where there's a lot of image processing, like pictures from X-ray scannings and MR scannings and CT scannings and all kind of pictures of skin changes where you have to do diagnosis. And this is about patterns and pattern recognition. And this is something that we have become really good at in the last few years.
So I would like to add that this, if you look now, so the interest from industry and society now is much bigger than it was before. If you go back 20, 30 years back, I think now interest is much bigger. I read a recent report from Vinnova. Vinnova is, Helen knows very well what Vinnova is. So it's a Swedish government agency which finances a lot of projects for universities and together with companies in research projects. And they produced a report concerning jobs in this area, not just predictions, but jobs, announced jobs. And the number of the jobs in artificial intelligence grows exponentially. And it's not just universities, mainly it's different companies. So it's huge interest from industry. And also if you look now, so we already have some results where such machines or algorithms are better than human beings. So I agree with Thomas that it's not really perhaps this artificial intelligence in that sense how we think those results achieved. But if you think about medical care and these images, image analysis in radiology, computer tomography, mammography, and then machines are already better than very good experts in that field. But one big issue is here that we learn without using millions and millions of images to learn. We generalize much better from few examples. This is a very big issue. Okay, then I would like to move to the next question. Thomas already mentioned one a little bit at your talk, this explainable AI. So if you think about artificial intelligence, very often you hear this paradigm like black boxes. So a lot of algorithms, very good algorithms, for example, for prediction, for classification, you can get very good results, good prediction, classification results, but we don't know why such decision, that or that decision was made. And this is very important in many different areas. For example, in medical care. So it's not enough to classify correctly that is healthy or sick. You also want to know why. So what do you think? So what will be in the future? It seems to me that society is not willing to accept that we will be governed by such black boxes. So what about this future of explainable AI and future of those black boxes approaches?
Right. So of course we cannot always get an explanation, right? So that also goes with humans. But in many cases, when humans take decisions, we can explain what was the basis for that decision, and that is actually in particular when it's a decision that required conscious reasoning. So if I'm asked about, so why do I think I'm asked to the color of this. And I say it's gray, and then maybe it's not, maybe someone says it's black or something. And then if I'm asked to explain why I think it's gray, then of course I don't know. I mean, it looks gray to me, so that's it. But if someone asks me, why did I decide to go to give this talk, or why did I decide to include this particular slide, of course I can explain, because that's not just about perception. That's about, I deliberately decided to do certain things because I considered options, and I sort of compared them and decide, okay, I want to do this for this and that reason, right? And then I can explain. So the problem is only that if we have AI systems that are not really reasoning that way, of course it can be problematic. So one example is like, there has been this, in the United States, they thought, let's try to, so we have these systems that can do predictions, that can statistically say what is the most likely next word, what is the most likely next node or something. So you can predict stuff, right? And then I say, okay, so let's try to take criminals in prisons in America, and then we try to predict how likely they are to commit new crime if they get a parole, and then we can use that to decide whether they should get a parole or not. So they use these techniques to give them a number between 1 and 10 concerning how big the risk was that they would commit new crime during parole. And what happened was that the system strongly overrated the risk that black people would commit new crimes, and strongly underestimated the risk that white people would commit new crime. And then you can say, okay, what is that? Is it a racial algorithm? No, it's not a racial algorithm, but it's trained on data. And it creates a huge, complicated, implicit statistical model. And of course, if the data somehow has some bias, it will be reproduced by the algorithm. And the problem afterwards is that, well, you can observe this is what happens, but if someone gets a score of 10, and that person says, why did I get a 10? Right? Why do you believe I'm a 10? There's no way to say it, right? For instance, if it's a neural network with hundreds of millions of neuron weights, you cannot point to why that decision was made. So what I think, and also I pointed a little bit to it in my talk, is that I think what we need is we need to have better integration, at least for the time being. That is my best bet. We need to have better integration of these sub-symbolic techniques, like neural networks that build implicit models, and they're super nice and they're super strong, but there's no way they are black boxes. We cannot really inspect and understand. And that should be connected to some of these symbolic techniques that are, in a sense, they're a bit old-fashioned in AI, but they still have a role to play, because there you have explicit models that can be inspected and understood by humans. And we see a trend in that direction. So, for instance, Google DeepMind is working a lot in that direction. So the DARPA, the American Defense Research Agency, they also say that this is the new wave of AI trying to combine these paradigms. So that's a long story, but currently my best bet for explainability is to combine these two different paradigms of AI, because, well, just maybe one last point, right? So I think if we decide to automatize something that humans have been doing, we should not lower our expectations, right? So if we want to replace our general practitioner by a medical diagnosis system, then we need to expect the same from that medical diagnosis system. And that does not only mean that it has to be as precise in its diagnosis as the human doctor, but we also need to be able to go back to that algorithm and say, okay, why did you tell me that? So it turned out that my disease was not what you predicted. So what happened? Why did you tell me that, right? So we need these kind of explanations, and that requires language. And that requires social intelligence. It requires social intelligence because you need to understand how to talk to other people that are at different expert levels. And this leads us directly into the tough problems of AI, so where we have to do more research, but we're working on it.
Okay, I'll add something. So first of all, I think we will not just skip so quickly into the exchanging a doctor with a robot or some other specialist with it. So it will be an intermediate, of course, time to make it all work. And I also wanted to say that the human mind is also a black box. So there are many situations where a human being cannot explain himself even. So of course we do not want this. We do not want AI to be like this, and so I have read of one interesting idea to create a so-called adversarial AI, so that he would follow what the original AI does and give some kind of feedback, some kind of information of what features has he learned, what assumptions he is going to make, and so on.
Artificial intelligence, he or she.
Yeah, sorry.
Or no.
Or no.
I want to share my experience with selling the solutions with artificial intelligence. To have a black box has advantages and disadvantages. For example, if something suddenly doesn't work and you're saying to your customer that it's black box, you don't know why. Maybe it's a problem in your data. Maybe you collect different kind of data, or it's changing environment. Therefore, you have to collect new data and train it. The biggest advantages I found between artificial intelligence and statistical methods that you can train your model by click of the button, and it should be much faster. Yeah. Therefore, black box we have all in our heads, and also I have to agree with you. It's also hard to explain why you're thinking like this, why you're talking like this, or you have some kind of intentions. Artificial intelligence hopefully don't have a conscience or soul or something that will have attentions to do something wrong or bad. It just computes something. Yeah.
Yeah, and talking about all the approaches that are possible to AI work, there are mainly, sometimes one approach is better. I'm talking in particular, maybe it's support vector machines, maybe it's artificial network, maybe it's a mixture of them. There's one approach that is more easily explainable, so maybe that could be the key to explain. It's called the decision tree and random tree forest. It's one of the ways that maybe some of those decisions could be explained. Yeah, there are some approaches that not only black box.
Okay, Vidas mentioned data, so I would like to discuss this issue. So we cannot build systems, artificial intelligence, without data. So we need economic policy which promotes data sharing, data exchange, and access to the data. So what do you feel? I would like to first start with Eva and Vidas, since you are in the industry, related to industry very closely. So how do you feel, if you look what's happening now, what's happened in the EU in May 25 last year, so it's very big restrictions concerning data exchange and so on. So what do you feel about that in industry? Do we go in that direction we should go, or should? Maybe I should not say should.
Well, in our case, yeah, it's a difficult topic, of course. However, there are many open data sources. This is quite okay, and so there are even companies that are building up now that work only with this data collection and all this legal stuff, and so it is possible for companies like us to collaborate with them, for example, to solve, not to take the solution by ourselves, but to just buy products, buy this data, and so this way we could save our time about this. But in fact, I do not have the answer of how we yet have to deal with it, with this all restrictions. Yeah, sorry. I just hope that maybe it will improve with time. That maybe people will see that there are some nuances and some details, and everything could be not so strict, and maybe there could be some exceptions.
Peter, how do you feel?
It depends on the task. If you are working with industry, it's easy to get the data for your training models, because the industry is interesting that the things happens. And also depends on the client. It's how it's want to work with this data. Maybe he wants to build the business for himself and don't want to share openly with other companies. I have different kind of company which don't care about sharing, and it allows us, for me as a scientist, write the papers and show that things is working. In other places, such as medical imaging analysis, is a huge problem because you have to have a data which is unpersonalized. And there's a lot of statisticians. It's really hard to get the data for that. Therefore, I'm looking for the opportunities that politicians could take their own decisions and allow us, for example, scientists, first of all, to work with data. Afterwards, for me as an entrepreneur, I can make a business from that by sharing, licensing, or something. Yeah, that's my opinion.
Well, maybe some more points to add is just this data is very, personal sometimes, and talking especially about the companies, all companies are unique and they have their own, strategies and their approaches how to tackle the problem. And I think this is the most sensitive thing to share. What is their key assumptions, their key data points, or so on. And this to be governed, it's very, so it's a discussion, still in discussions, and it opens a lot of discussions at the moment, at least.
What is your view on that?
Yes, so of course there's a kind of built-in dilemma, because the more data you have, the better the algorithms will be. So also I gave these examples where you plug in 100,000 books of text into a machine, and if you want to be able to recognize skin cancer or psoriasis or something, you want as many pictures as possible of different skin diseases. So you need data, right? But so one of the dilemmas is the privacy issue, that maybe, I mean, we don't necessarily want to give away all our personal data and then have it publicly accessible to everybody to look into. And that is, okay, so then we have regulations on that, but also there's research being done, like something called differential privacy, where you look into ways of anonymizing in a way so that you cannot, it becomes anonymized, right? Another issue is who has access to the data. So I would say the ideal democratic way would be that almost all data is like open source, accessible to everybody. So for instance, in Denmark, we have a lot of public health data. And then when Denmark wanted to look into medical diagnosis systems, they made an agreement with a company that wanted to train a system for doing medical diagnosis. And then they got all the public Danish health data. But only they got it. So everybody else, and there was a big international company, I don't need to mention the name, you can look it up if you want. but it meant that nobody, if there was a Danish startup company that said, okay, I think we can actually do better than you guys. We can make a better medical diagnosis system because we have better algorithms. They wouldn't be able to do it because they didn't have the data. And that creates a kind of unfairness. And so the worst case scenario is more or less what we see right now, that the big tech companies have all the data. And it's impossible to get into certain markets because of that. It's impossible to compete with Google because they already have all the data. It's impossible to compete with Facebook because they have all that data. It's impossible to compete with Amazon. But we have given for many years, we have given away our data and so they know how we act and what we bought and what we search for on the internet. But now they cannot be beaten, right? So even if you're a startup company that has a much better algorithm or idea, it's almost impossible to compete with these giants. And I don't have the solution for that, except, I mean, ideally we should move into more like this open source data environment, but it's going to be a really, really tough thing to pull through, but it could, for instance, be like, let's say, like all traffic data or something. We anonymize it, we make it accessible, and then any startup company who wants to make an intelligent traffic control system or something, they have the data, they can all use it, they can try out, and whoever does best will win that game, instead of it now being a few tech giants that have all the data and all the advantages.
We have 4 more minutes to go for this discussion. After that, session starts. So we could perhaps take one more question. And this is about the global world. If you look what's happening in the world now, China, I read that they have a plan for a few coming years, $150 billion for artificial intelligence. I read that France, they made a plan for 1.5 billion euros. So what we can do there, such countries like Lithuania, Denmark, Nordic countries, we are very, very small compared to these resources. What do you think about that? How we should act, what we could do that to achieve, to be visible in this game, in this competition?
Well, as far as Lithuania is concerned, we are a small country, yes, and this can we make an impact may even sound like a turn-off, because it's scary. We are so small. Can we do an impact? So maybe we should just focus on ourselves. We should focus on our country, and we must just do what we have to, which is to, I don't know, to just work on some regulations, to set clear limits, clear rules. We have to inform our society. We have to also educate them. I personally think that in schools we already have to begin to talk with children. What is AI? What are these ethical aspects? We have to encourage them to learn maths, maybe even in informatics and everything, as we are doing now. But we have to continue this, because I think it's the only way of truly understanding the artificial intelligence, how it works and its ways and algorithms and everything. And if you do not know anything about statistics and I don't know, you don't know programming, you cannot fully understand what an artificial intelligence is. Probably this.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think we should not just give up, even though we're small countries. I think that so one thing is that all technology is colored by our cultural background. So the way we think about the technology, the kind of technology we develop, the research we do, is colored by our culture, right? And our cultures, so for instance, Lithuanian and Danish culture is different from American and Chinese culture. So if you look at, there's some interesting research of dimensions of culture that talks about the cultural dimensions and aspects of culture. And for instance, in Denmark and Lithuania, there's a lot of focus on fairness and equality and social aspects and sort of relating to other people. And if you think, and that also plays into what kind of AI you want to build. So one example here is that everybody in Denmark is super proud of a company called Universal Robots. And they make cobots. And cobots are robots that are supposed to interact with humans in a safe way. So it's really about collaborating, humans collaborating with robots. And as I said, machines and humans have different strengths and weaknesses, so it makes a lot of sense to think about this kind of collaboration. And Universal Robots, they're now #1 in the world, and there was another company called Rethink Robotics in the United States that was started by one of the biggest names in AI, and they went bankrupt in October of last year because of this company, right? So I think it's, even if you're a small country, and of course, okay, so Denmark or Lithuania, we're not going to be building the next Google probably, right? But we can still find our niches, and we should think about our cultural advantages, right? And I think we all kind of agree that we're probably different from both Americans and Chinese, and that can be used to advantage. Not that we will be world leading in all aspects of AI, but use the kind of values we have as a parameter for the kind of AI we invent. I think that's actually quite reasonable, and I think we have to do that, right? Because otherwise our cultural values will be destroyed, because then we will only import AI from abroad, and since that is already colored by culture, then, well, we don't have our own culture anymore, so.
We as small countries should prepare our environment for artificial intelligence. We have to train our kids to know about more about artificial intelligence. We have to inform our industrial partners about industrial artificial intelligence. Maybe we can create some funds where we can finance our project based on that, and we have to think about hardware which we are using everywhere. For example, Lithuania has the fastest internet, and the environment itself can grow something, some specific solution of artificial intelligence in specific area, and maybe we will have something in here also in Lithuania. Its environment is important.
To sum up, I think in Lithuania we have a huge potential of students, smart people who are good at all those IT things, AI. But the biggest problem is that all those good specialists move to United States, where they get premium salary. And one of the approaches that France, for example, took is to invest into those startups. I'm not talking about the amounts of those 1.5 billion and so on, but all those startups, hackathons that are going on, I think it's one of the good examples that should continue, maybe expand more. But yeah, I think at least some of the investments could also be made into this field in the Nordic countries too.
And in your technology is a good example that you can be successful even in a small country.
Yes, yeah. Well, that's funny actually, because there was an AI meetup where the person who was the leader of this meetup, he said a fun fact that he was in NASA, and he said, "Do you know neurotechnology?" And he said, and that person said, "Oh yes, we know. We are already creating the department to compete with their biometric algorithms." So that's nice to hear that our country, it's leading somewhere.
Too much.
Yeah, so that's a response to you. So, I mean, in a sense, so it's not only about the money. So I have some of the brightest colleagues I have ever had went to either Facebook and Google, and I said, "Why are you leaving academia?" And they said to go to these companies and said, "We want to get our hands on data, because if we have ideas, we need the data," right? So that goes back to the earlier discussion. Mm-hmm. And now they're gone. Now they're in the States, right? So of course, what France does is super important, and we should all invest much more in AI. I agree. But it's really more than that, right? Because in this case, it's not because of the salary. It's not because of living on a sunny beach in California. It's really about getting the hands on data and do it and make a difference. So that's really something to think about. And we need companies that people also in our countries can be proud of, and that can attract them and say, okay, but I would really love to be here. They are doing cool stuff on AI. And what I'm seeing, and I don't know how much it is happening in the rest of the Europe, but what I'm seeing in Denmark is now that those companies who want to attract AI researchers are starting actually to, good AI people are moving more towards research, and they're starting to publish papers just like Facebook does and Google does, etc. Because that is a way of attracting the best minds. Because people come and they had a PhD degree, and they say, okay, I would like to work for you, but are you doing interesting stuff? I mean, are you writing papers? And then companies are starting to do that in order to attract the best people. And for me as a researcher, that's perfect, because it means that industry and academia are getting closer to one another, and that industry is also helping with research. So I think this is really super important, and because exactly the brightest people are those that are closest to, they want to do something novel, right? They want to be known, they want to have their names on papers. So this is something important to think about also for the AI startup companies in Lithuania and in Denmark. And yeah.
Thank you all for the discussion. I think now we have to start these questions. So you haven't had a chance to ask Thomas questions after his talk, so I understand that most of the questions perhaps go to Thomas, but you are welcome to ask all of us questions. So please go ahead with your questions. Who would like to start? Yes, Helen, please.
I have the mandate, and we, the team of the Nordic Council of Ministers, have the mandate to enhance the cooperation between the Nordic and the Baltic. So in the field of AI, where do you see the advantages and challenges? And could we, so to say, cooperate when it comes to keep the resources in our region, so that we also, we support very much Women Go Tech, because we also need women to be part of this, knowing that we need more people, especially maybe in Lithuania more than in Denmark.
Definitely we can cooperate in different kind of projects. And depends on the task, what we want to do. And therefore, if the task is interesting, many smart people will come and join to this project.
Yeah, so there are certain cultural differences between the Baltics and the Scandinavian countries, but there's also, there are more similarities and differences. And again, maybe that's one thing to build upon, because we're actually also getting experts from foreign countries coming to Denmark. So that's a bit surprising. But when you go to these high-tech companies doing AI stuff, a lot of them are actually foreigners. And so why do they come to Denmark? And what I realize with these people is that they are super occupied by explainable AI and the environment. They are occupied by democratic values and having an egalitarian society, right? So these are people that are attracted to do this in Denmark because it's not United States, because it's not China. It's a different culture, right? It's a different society. It's a different place to be in Copenhagen than in Silicon Valley, right? So I think that is something to build upon, and to the degree that we have some similarities between the Baltics and the Scandinavian countries, then I see, that could be somehow some attractive collaboration. But otherwise, but personally, it's for me, for instance, and for the companies I know, at the outside, they don't really care who they are collaborating with. They want to collaborate with whomever is the best to collaborate with, right? So there has to be you have to somehow say there's a good reason for it to be, let's say, a Baltic country, for instance. But that could be the cultural aspects, right? That kicks in. But it also then depends on the projects. What is it we want to solve? But I think maybe also, it would be interesting to ask you that question, right? Because you spend most of your professional life in Sweden, and now you're back here, and then maybe you have some deeper insights on this.
From my point of view, a very big challenge. It was what challenges, what are the challenges? So I think it's human resources, young people, how to involve young people, attract to that area so that they stay in academia. You have to stay in academia for some time to gain knowledge, and then with this knowledge you could go to then create a company, for example. And this is, I think, is the main challenge here from my point of view, what I see, what's happening. So it's not enough young people staying in that area. So these information technologies now is very popular. You can go in different companies and be employed, and you can get good salary. So, but it's what we need here, that involve people in research and then to relate it to industry, I think.
It's maybe a Lithuania's problem that we really do have the salary gap, and especially in academia, it's, most people would have work in some private sector and then do the, volunteering in academia. So that's how it works here, and it should be improved somehow. I think this is the problem.
Yeah. young people also want to have some salary. You want to too. So.
And talking about the academia, I think, at least in Lithuania, there is a situation that most of the good students leave to good universities, top universities like UK, but gradually some of those universities are top rated in Sweden, Denmark, so we kind of stay here in these Nordic countries. The only question, and what is more, some people from, I also studied in Lund in Sweden, so I found many good examples when students from United States or Australia come to Sweden, but then it's good to know that we attract from all over the world to these Nordic countries. But yeah, then the whole issue is how to keep them, how to keep them here.
Okay, yes, please.
Hey everyone, thank you very much for your discussion. Can you elaborate more about what's the situation with finances, more specifically from European Union? How much there's investment being spent on new research and on the industry itself? For example, a group of students or a group of people want to start a startup. What is possible today to get for funding? Because to train something on machine learning or something, you need powerful GPUs. Otherwise, it's a long game.
Who are you asking?
All of us. Anyone who knows, well, what's the actual situation?
I don't know if I know so much, but I mean, I guess a lot of the venture funding is not tied to a specific country, right? So I have some of my previous students and PhD students. They started up. They made startup companies, right? And then they go to the States maybe to present the idea, and they have some investors from there, or they have investors from England, and they also, many of them are collaborating with people from different European countries, and then they meet once every 2 weeks in Barcelona or something. So it's pretty global, I would say. I'm not really sure. I mean, I don't think we have. I'm not really an expert on it. I'm not sure there's something that of course we do a bit in Denmark, but it's not really because it's Danish money that is being invested. So now there's a new AI strategy in Denmark, but if you compare to what they're doing in France in terms of finances, it's just a joke. It's nothing, right? So it's really it's a global market, and that's not being so much done to stimulate the local projects, and I don't know how it is in Lithuania, but my guess is it's similar.
So I can tell a little bit about Sweden. Helen can correct me if I'm wrong, but so you have most of money in that comes from the government, and also from European Union, and also from private funds like Wallenberg Stiftelse. So it's some kind of private, very, very huge fund. And it was a research made very recently about not just Sweden, but also compared to other European countries, how it works. So you have to write grants and to apply for money, specifically in Sweden, quite a lot. You get some universities, get some money from the government directly, direct funding, and then you have to apply different funds like so-called Vetenskapsrådet, that it's Research Council of Sweden, and other funds. And there is a very high competition there. It's very tough to get funding, and so good researchers spent a lot of time, too much time, to be effective as you could be effective compared to other countries. And this research made quite recently discovered that countries, if I remember correctly, I think it's Switzerland and the Netherlands, they allocate more money directly to universities without allowing them go through different these funds, right applications, and they are more efficient in research results. For example, publications and citations numbers. So this is quite recent research. So you know, the main fund comes from the government, but also these European funds. But European funds also very, very competitive, you know. Just one moment. So you have a few funds, then for cooperation with industry. I mentioned Vinnova earlier. So with Vinnova, you have to cooperate with companies, like, for example, Volvo, Ericsson, and other companies. There are different programs. And then So it's quite a lot of money there at Vinnova, and also is Kokostiftelsen, so-called other fund for small universities, and it's a prerequisite that to write a project is to at least 2 companies. And this is another prerequisite now, is that companies, they also provide some funding, but not in money, but in working time. So people from company have to spend time in project. Some years back, I thought it's a very bad idea, but now I think it's a very good idea that you work together on research project with the companies, and then knowledge stays at the companies, and this is what is expected to be.
Hello. For notice, I have no knowledge about AI. Curiosity led me to this event, but my attention was caught by data. That, as you said, the big companies have a lot of data, and this is the problem. My question is maybe just to ask them to share, cooperate, or sell the data if it's possible, or any kind of solutions for that.
Well, there are companies that do sell the data, yes, it's true, but it's actually very expensive, so that's a question, how to fix this.
I read recently prediction, I don't remember who predicted that in the future, in that area, artificial intelligence are going to survive companies which have data, not the companies which have algorithms. So a lot of algorithms already developed and will be developed, but if you have data, like Thomas mentioned, Amazon, Facebook, Google, and so on, so data, what is important, and then it means that companies are not willing, perhaps, to give up the data easily. At least not all the companies.
I mean, it's very hard to control, right? But in principle, it should be that then I can sell my data, right? So instead of that, whatever I do on Google and Facebook is just now belongs to them. They can buy it if they want, and I guess now you have a right to be forgotten, and you can get your data removed. But it would be in a way nicer if you could sell your data, right? So I could also decide. So I would want to sell my health data to some company. Actually, I would rather like everything to be open source. But if not, then at least that would be better. That it's for sale somehow, right? But I don't know. I'm really not an expert on that, and I don't know how to make it work in reality, right? Because how are you supposed to control what a company takes out when you interact with the company? Of course, they get that information, right? When you drive around in a Tesla, then all the input from the sensors is automatically sent back to the Tesla factories, so they can improve on their autopilot, right? So that's kind of natural that they do so, but how would you do otherwise? So then I don't know. I only know it's complicated.
I think our time is gone now, but perhaps we could take one more question. Or? If we follow the plan, so we have to stop now.
Hello, maybe 2 short questions. First of all, the key issue is the data. So the question for Lithuanian participants here, do you agree that open science is very important? And the one key issue is to share the data, the research data you're obtaining with your colleague. And the second question, also very short. Okay, do you believe that without interest from the industry, from the business, okay, it's just academia thoughts and our wishes to obtain public data for our research? But how do you prove that it must be interested for business?
Well, at least answering to the first question, there are 2 models how academia can contribute to this. One way is when there are companies and they work along with companies, and another way is projects, to do the projects with the companies. So, and the project has the end date, right? So you investigate certain project, if it's feasible, not feasible, and so on. So in terms of project, you can, I think, share this data, and this is not that, it could be open data, right? But when we are talking about the companies, it's very sensitive, and I don't think that this open data concept could work, at least from my opinion.
The open data concept is working when you have a small company. You want to have that open data. When you are big, you're trying to save your business. Companies should collaborate more with the universities, because universities has the people, right people, who understands the principles of AI, and therefore it can be much faster. Getting the things right, it can be much faster than do company alone.
Okay, so for sharing, we know that sharing is caring, of course, but so if we see us as a Lithuania as a unit, so we probably would want to share everything to have a better views, to be better viewed on the whole world. But as a company, probably, yeah, we would. Every company has its own ways, its own data, and that's a sensitive question. And as far as collaboration is concerned, I also think that companies should collaborate with universities, not only because universities have bright minds, but also it is basically very difficult to have all the courses up to date in this section, in the AI, because it develops very fast, and probably it's sometimes good to have someone from the company who is working in this quite narrow area to share his knowledge because I think that often the person who works in this narrow area has the most up-to-date news. So maybe the courses to be updated, they need a person who works in this area, and it's not also always possible with lecturers, I think.
From my point of view, I think we need in Lithuania, we need to work more with society, within the society to, I think you could, even if you are working at a company, you could share some data, maybe not everything, but some data you could share. So we need to understand that if we share the data, so we can get back some good results by sharing the data. Maybe you can get from other companies. I remember in Sweden, we collaborated with two competitors in papermaking industries, Stora and Stora at that time, and also Holman Paper. They are competitors. They're producing the same newsprint. And we collaborated with those competitors, and they shared some data. Not their secrets, which are very important for their technology, but some data which you could share. And then from that, you can get back better understanding what you should do to develop your technology further in the future. So I think we need to work within the society, talking about that and making our policies, different policies about the data. Of course, there are very sensitive issues like healthcare. There are questions. I don't know. What should we stop or should we continue? Okay, let's take one more question, one last question.
Okay. This is mostly directed to Professor Thomas. So it is undeniable that the automation and the rise of AI do threaten jobs. It is predicted that 25% of the US jobs are on high risk of disappearing due to AI. Now, in the 80s and the 90s, with the computer and the internet revolution, it was also a worry that the social structure would collapse because many jobs because of the computerization would be lost. Now, but the contrary happened because an abundance of office jobs and maintenance jobs were created. Now, do you see the same thing happening with AI? And in what areas can the non-mathematically literate, non-algorithmically literate people can prevail?
Okay, yeah, that's super interesting, right? So a couple of 100 years ago, I think, 80% of Danes were working with farming somehow, and now 80% is in the service industry, right? So that's a huge change. And the point is, when you make these predictions into the future, you normally say, okay, so This is what we do now, and these are the kind of tasks we solve. Now let's assume that, let's look at which of these tasks can be taken over by something else, and where will that then leave us afterwards, right? So for instance, when you think about industrialism, then you would also predict that, okay, but then there will be many people will be out of job, and there will be unemployed, but what happened, of course, is that you raise your level of ambition, because now you can do things faster and more efficient, and then you can increase other things like health and quality of food, etc. Right? So sometimes when you make these predictions, you are making the mistake that you think of society as being stable, and our level of ambition is stable. Of course, we don't want to go. If we wanted to go 200 years back and say we just want the same living standard as back then most of us wouldn't even have to work, right? So the reason we are working is because we want more. We want better houses, we want better transport, we want better health, we want longer lives, we want better food, etc. And we can keep on doing that. Now we want longer vacations, we want better spare time, we want higher quality this and that, and we want more personal interaction. So what I'm seeing is that what is happening is, of course, that all these areas where AI cannot solve problems are becoming more valued in a sense, right? So when I say that social intelligence and linguistic intelligence are hard problems for AI, so then I also see that there's a rise in demands for people with mathematical skills, but there's also a rise in demand for people that have good linguistic and social skills, right? Because those are things we cannot automatize. And also we want now, we can, in principle, we can interact with a machine and have lots of problems solved, right? But then it becomes like the true valuable thing is then to interact with a real human, right? And get personalized service from a human being that helps you, instead of interacting with a computer program or looking things up on the web. So I think so we are seeing that somehow the trend is going towards those things that are still uniquely human, like more social intelligence and linguistic intelligence. I know that is not very precise, but yeah. So yeah. So the overall answer is there's no reason to believe that this will lead to mass unemployment, because we just always figure out more things we want to do, right? So. But what exactly those jobs will be, of course, we don't know. But if we try to extrapolate, then yes, we want to have better health, we want to have better quality spare time, and this means more people in the service industry, more people in health, more people in research, of course. We want to solve the environmental crisis. How much resources can you invest in that? That's unlimited, right? It's unlimited, so.
It was one question, the young lady in the back. If you still want to ask, please, go ahead.
Hi. So I wanted to ask about social intelligence. How popular is it from the business side of you, and how popular is it from the research side of you?
Right. Okay. So I guess in a sense you could say it's more popular from the research point of view because it's not fully developed yet, right? So there's something called social robotics, and there are conferences in this area, and there are also companies saying, okay, we work on social robotics. But what they mainly do is that could be something like tracking facial expressions, like if you're happy or sad, or maybe your use of words, whether you seem to be calm or angry or aggressive or sad by the use of your words. And that is also it's kind of considered to be social robotics. And that is something we know how to work with, so we can build a robot that acts differently depending on whether it recognizes you being happy or sad. But the way it reacts is hard-coded, right? So the AI is only for recognizing your mood, let's say, right? But the way it reacts based on your mood is hard-coded. So that is less ambitious than what I try to do, right? Because I try to build systems that has this theory of mind, that has a general ability to take the perspective of another individual. And of course, that is not. It's not yet ready for a product. So of course, it's more research today than it's industry and applications. But if you look at the history of AI, of course, that has happened for all the areas of AI, right? Neural networks didn't start out as something where every company said, "Oh my God, this is impressive. Let's work with that and let's use it in all our systems." It starts out as being research, and then at some point it gets sufficiently mature. But I think I personally, of course, I work with it, so I think it's important. But I really think it's super important because so far we have to kind of get into the heads of the machines and understand how they work, right? And that's not sustainable if we want to engage with more and more machines in our everyday life. They have to also understand just a little bit of what goes on inside our heads so they can stop being socially annoying, right? If we want these intelligent personal assistants in our houses that can turn on the light and that can play music and can help us cooking or whatever, but they have to be non-annoying, and that requires some social intelligence. So, yeah.
Okay, let me thank Thomas for coming here and giving excellent talk, and Helen for organizing this event, I understand, and our panelists for participating in the discussion, and also all of you for coming and participating in this event. Thank you very much.